So I'm Bob Wyson, and Erik is my son-in-law, and Alice and Lysa are my daughters. And several days ago, Lysa texted me and said, "Dad, thank you for giving permission to Erik to marry me." And so I want to tell a little bit about that backstory. So I first met Erik when he came to Wilmington, to the house that Nemo and I lived in about 29 years ago. As a backstory to that, he and Lysa had been seeing each other at CIU, Columbia International University. And we kind of knew something was up when Erik arrived, and so I wanted to test him as to how well he would handle kids, and especially to see how well he fished. And so I did both by inviting him and Lysa and Alice to join two young boys that I had invited out on a fishing expedition in the nearby Brandywine River. Now, I had secret permission from the groundskeeper at the DuPont Country Club that I could cut across the golf area there as long as I didn't walk on the greens. After all, I was a DuPont employee in the nearby experimental station. And he had told me, however, that if I was ever confronted by another official, he didn't know me. So, to be less conspicuous, I'd rigged up a hand golf cart that was kind of camouflaged, and I had the fishing rod stuck up in the golf cart with golf socks over the top of it. And our bait was concealed in a cooler which was strapped onto the side of the golf cart. That would be minnows. And when we descended a pretty rough hill to the river, and then we proceeded to wade out, with Erik assisting me with the kids, wade up to our waist and occasionally up to our chest as we were going across the river. And then when we got nearly to the other side, there was a side stream of rapids which came across, where the kids had to be passed across. And so we each had wading sticks that I provided, which incidentally, in thinking about the country club, was an old steel-shafted driver that I had hacksawed the end off of and attached it with a D-ring onto my belt. And so Erik passed me the kids one at a time safely across the rapids. And check. We then emerged onto a little sandy area where we were going to start fishing. Now, I'd earlier told the kids that Erik was Finnish. I called him Erik the Red. And didn't speak much English, and then said that in his country, when he fished, he usually dove into the water and grabbed the fish with his teeth. And by this time, his eyes were rolling, so I said, "But we're not going to do that today." And so he played along with all of this. So everybody proceeded to fish, and Erik caught some nice fish. Check. So then, as a backstory there, Lysa and Alice used to always outfish the boys that I took out on the adventures. From our neighborhood, we had fishing tournaments and so on. They always outfished the boys. But this time, Lysa didn't catch any fish, but she still had a big smile on her face. Turns out she landed about a 190-pounder later on. So the story leading to that catch starts when we got back. We went around back to a patio that we had, and there was a flower bed surrounding that. And Erik and I were putting mulch down into that bed. And then he turned to me and he said, "You know, your daughter and I are kind of heading along the same pathway." And so I'm saying, The asking for permission speech, check. And so I glanced up at the back window and saw a couple of faces pressed up against that would be Lysa, up against the back window. And so I had a habit of standing like this for some reason to relax his hand. When I saw them, I turned around like this. And the faces disappeared, probably reappeared something in another window. And so Erik then said, you know, your daughter can be just a wee bit headstrong at times. And so I was busy looking surprised. And then he went on with his speech and he says, but I sacrificed that for my love for her. Double click. Listen up, fathers. If you want to keep her son-in-law in fisherman's terms, listen up. And it brought to mind Jesus' love for us, his bride, the church. And Erik then said at some point, not anytime soon, famous last words, I wish to ask your daughter's hand in marriage. Well, it turns out he lasted about 4 hours. When Lysa said yes, check. So in retrospect, how did Erik do about handling kids later on? So first of all, I want to mention that he's imparted some really good stuff to each of my grandkids, all 6 of them that are here now. All of my grandkids know the Lord and also are God's children. And so they have a love for the Lord. They love to sing. They love to write songs and stories and plays. They like to play piano, and many of them like to play guitar. They love playing games and sports, and they love fishing. So, two quick stories before I get the hook here, involving Erik and some of his kids. One of them that I think of is that Erik had made a YouTube recording of these are the things you don't say to your wife. And one of the lines in there is, go make some dinner, dear, while I watch this fishing show. It sounded logical to me. But then the next line I bailed out, and he says, I taped it over our old wedding video. Whoops. But the wise chorus goes, if you want to live a long and healthy life, these are the things you don't say to your wife. And in that particular recording, you can see little Luke walking around in the background on purpose, kind of smiling back and forth. The second story involves Johnny while he was in the previous house in the sidewalk in his neighborhood. We were walking along, and Johnny said, what happened? Said, Abby, which they call me, what happened to the hair on top of your head? And I said, the dog ate it. And about that time, a dog appeared further down the street on the sidewalk coming towards us. And he hid behind me, and he looked around, and he said, is that one of those hair-eating dogs? So, that's the backstory to what's coming up next. It turns out that Johnny had a habit of jumping up into the bed with Erik and Lysa. And since Johnny was closer to the headboard of the bed, he was looking down the top of his dad's head, and he said, Dad, dog eat your hair too? Erik sat up and said, what? And so the final story involves Johnny and David when they were a little older, and David had used something like fingernail clippers to slice up an area of Johnny's beanbag chair. And Erik, surely David had not been excessively teased by Johnny. But anyway, Erik heard about the chair, And he told David he was going to give him a big spanking and his favorite toy is going to be taken away. But Johnny, seeing David's predicament, said this to Erik, don't take his toy away. I'll take his spanking. And Erik says, okay, but I'm not going to hold back. The story goes that as Erik spanked Johnny, tears rolled down Erik's face. What a picture of Jesus taking our penalty and paying the price for our sins on the cross, while God, the loving Father, cries. Erik was a loving father, a loving husband, loving friend, loving son-in-law.